This 2024 NBA Southeast Division Betting Preview edition of the NBA Gambling Podcast on the Sports Gambling Podcast Network is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. Sign up with promo code NBA SGPN to score up to $1,000 in bonus cash. We're also brought to you by Rhythm. Get your 7-day free trial today by going to sportsgamblingpodcast.com/rhythm. That's sportsgamblingpodcast.com/RITHMM. Welcome, everyone, to the NBA Gambling Podcast, part of the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. Here to get into our first division preview for the 2024-2025 NBA season. We'll be getting into the Southeast division here to kick things off. We'll go through division odds, win totals, make miss playoffs, all that good stuff for the division and these teams. We'll kind of look back at what we saw last year from these teams here as well. Maybe not the most glamorous division here, but it was a division that we'll talk about it here in a minute. But joining me here to help me break everything down for this division, I got my guy here with me. It's Scott Studio Reichel. Scott, what's going on, man?
Hey, doing pretty well. Good to be back for the NBA. I know that Terrell and I have been trying to keep the podcast channel afloat with the WNBA, but now we're back. Should be fun. First of course, all the division previews. We got award shows coming up, a lot of content. We're about, I'd say, less than a month away. So once again, get excited.
Yeah, it's already that time again. Usually around this time, getting into the month of October, we kind of have that cluster where NBA is going on. You got MLB playoffs, WNBA playoffs going on as well. Getting ready for the WNBA season. So definitely busy times around the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. Scott, let's get into it here, man. We'll dive right into the Southeast Division here. And last season, this was a division that didn't have a single team that won more than 47 games. Last year, the Orlando Magic did win this division by a game. 47-35 was their record, followed by the Miami Heat, who finished one game back, 46-36. And then after that, there was just a significant drop-off just because the quality of teams in this division isn't to write home about. The Hawks finished up 36-46. The Charlotte Hornets at 21-61, and then the Washington Wizards, who finished a lowly 15-67 last year. We can just talk about general things about this division, then we'll just go team by team, and then we could get into more specifics here. But in totality, here, Scott, Southeast Division. I mean, what were your thoughts on this division last season?
My thoughts: this division is not very good. But I will point out the Magic did go to a Game 7. So there was that. They didn't win a playoff series, so that wasn't exactly that fun. But I feel like there's one thing people forget. It's the fact that the Heat were such a circus last year, and they lost immediately in the playoffs, and they were only one game behind the Magic to win the division. I feel like people forget that was actually a thing. It felt like Orlando ran away with the division with about 3 weeks to go, but people might have forgotten Orlando was actually falling apart down the stretch. There were some thoughts that they might blow the division. They were up by a decent amount, fell apart, but they managed to hold on barely to win it anyway. But the Heat only trailing by one game by season's end feels like it was, I'd say, not even in the realm of possibility. It felt like Orlando won the division by 3-4 games.
Yeah, last season, I mean, in particular, the Miami Heat, they were riddled by injuries led by Jimmy Butler. I mean, he still played in 60 of the 82 games, but it was just like you mentioned, it was really a circus kind of going through their injury report last season. And then Tyler Hero only played 42 of the 82 games last year as well. Jaime Jaquez had a pretty decent season for the Miami Heat. He played in 75 of the 82, but we'll get into all that when we talk about the Miami Heat. But yeah, it was a struggle, right? Like you mentioned, for the Orlando Magic, they were able to hold on. One of the best teams, if not the best team last season when it came to the spread, especially at home. I know they were the number one team ATS, just overall in their 82 games, and especially at home. I think this was an early trend that we had caught on to here on the NBA Gambling Podcast, was their first halves, which was really, really profitable to start the season for the Orlando Magic. So let's just get into the Orlando Magic here. Or before, we do that, let me tell everyone about the newest episode and the podcast on the Sports Gambling Podcast Network, led by Sean Green. He will be joined by Doug Stanhope and Brendan Walsh on the newest podcast, like I mentioned, on SGPN. Get to the point. Every Thursday before the game on Thursday Night Football, Doug, Brendan, and Sean give out their favorite plays and talk a ton of shit. Doug and Brendan are professional comedians. You may know them from the Joe Rogan podcast, the Howard Stern Show, and Comedy Central. Subscribe wherever you do get your podcast. All right, let's kick it here with the Orlando Magic, like we talked about, held on last season for the division crown, finishing up with a record of 47-35. Pushed it to a game 7 in the playoffs against the Cleveland Cavaliers. And this season, Scott, they are the odds-on division favorite right now at a price around -155. Their win total about the same wins as last year, 47.5, and they're making missed playoff odds right now. So they got -750 to make it, and then +550 to miss the playoffs here. But we can start with the win total here, 47.5. What are your thoughts on that for the Orlando Magic?
I like the over. I feel like when we're talking about teams that made some moves during the offseason, I still wish Orlando upgraded the center position. I'm just not a big Wendell Carter fan, but they got KCP, and I like KCP. I think KCP is a good player. KCP was a guy that I wasn't exactly that in on when he was with the Lakers or even like the Pistons way back in the day. He was very good with Denver. I thought he was their best on-ball defender. I thought that he was a very solid 3-and-D guy. And I think it's exactly what Orlando needed. I feel like the issue we've had with Orlando for years, not enough three-point shooting. And it feels like KCP is a very good piece for that because they're going to run some off-ball stuff for him, coming around screens. But mostly defensively, if there's a lineup where you throw him out there with Jonathan Isaac and Suggs, good luck. That's just a hell of a defensive lineup if you want to use that 3 at any point in a game. So I think with that being the case, I am going to go with Orlando to go over. I like this team a lot. When we talk about teams, and I'd say the natural buildup of teams into potential contenders, usually you pass some checkpoints year in, year out. You know, you make the playoffs, you win the division, then you slowly get better while making slight improvements. Orlando does check a lot of those boxes. If you think Banchero has a chance of going up a level, which I think both of us do. I'm not saying he's going to be a top 10 guy in the league, but I think that Banchero is a future all-star, a guy that can give you potentially 25 a game. Maybe 25 and like 7, 25 and 8. I think he can give you much, I'd say, more efficient scoring, and that's one area he can develop in his game. I think this team's really good. I think this team is not going to compete for, I'd say, a title or anything, but can I see them winning a playoff series this year? Yes. When we're talking about teams making steps, Orlando made the playoffs. They had a massive lead in Game 7. They choked it with inexperience. I do think they'll improve. The question for this team, which might determine their upside, can Franz Wagner hit a jump shot? Because he couldn't hit a three-pointer to save his life the entire season last year. And I feel like his three-point numbers fell off a cliff. If Orlando can get some consistent three-point shooting from Banchero, Wagner, and of course, then they brought in KCP to help with that, this team should win 50-plus games. Now, I'm not saying Wagner's going to suddenly shoot 40% from 3, but if he shoots around like 34%, Orlando's going to take it. Because he could not hit a jump shot last year. So I do think that looking at Orlando, they check a lot of boxes. It's a weak division. I think they're the best team in this division, in my opinion, by a decent margin, just based on how they're built and the potential hunger that they have as a young team. They care about the regular season. They want to make a statement. I like their overall talent. I like the over. I think this team might end up winning like 51, 52 games.
Yeah, last season, this includes the playoffs last year. They were the number 1 team, ATS, like I talked about earlier. 55-34, 61.8% covering rate there. And as a home team, we mentioned this as well, right? 30-13. That includes the playoff games there as well. 69.8% they covered. And again, we mentioned that they were very, very good in the first half of games as well. I mean, they were just an absolute cash cow. But yeah, the biggest weakness you mentioned, right, was inconsistencies from beyond the arc. And I think you bring in a true 3D guy with KCP who has playoff experience, championship experience. When he was with the Denver Nuggets, when he was with the Lakers. What was it? Was it the Wizards that he was with prior to, I believe, as well? But you bring in that type of veteran on this roster, I think that can only help them. And I really like betting on teams that following season after they gave that taste of that playoffs the season prior, right? Because I think you nailed it when you mentioned that they got this to a game 7 and just really they
fell apart.
They fell apart in the inexperience for not only the coaching staff, but also the players, right? And I think that's obviously when you have this type of young talent here, you want to get back to that level. You want to get back to the playoffs, and you want to win a playoff series. And I think they're fully capable of doing that. And this team last season was relatively healthy, right? Jonathan Isaac, we're hoping that he can play at least multiple, I mean, not multiple games, but I mean, play at least half or if not 50 plus games this season for the Orlando Magic, because we took a look at it last year for this team. Paulo Banchero, 80 games. Franz Wagner, 72. Jalen Suggs, 75. Jonathan Isaac, he played in 58 games, but started only 2. And there's a lot of great depth on this team, right? Anthony Black off the bench, Cole Anthony as well. You have Gary Harris that gets pushed back to the bench there as well. Jonathan Isaac, and then Mo Wagner. So that's a pretty solid bench for a bench that the coaching can't have utilized, whether they go 8 deep, 9 deep, or possibly even 10 deep at times here. So I do like them to win the division here. I also do like I'm with you on the over at 47.5. If your book does offer those alternate wins, if you want to get this up to 50, get yourself some nice plus money. I definitely do think that they are definitely in the realm of possibility here to get over 40, at least 50 wins, like Scott mentioned as well.
I do want to point out, by the way,
go ahead.
If you are looking at legals, you can find the Magic to win 50-plus games this season at around plus 150.
Plus 150 for 50 plus?
For 50-plus, yeah.
Yeah, I definitely coincide that. Anything else for Orlando?
Not really. I did pull up some three-point numbers, though, from this team. Wagner, I said before, has to fix the three-point ball. Attempted 4.6, second most on the team. Shot 28.1% from 3. That can't happen.
Yeah.
Unless you're Westbrook, you got to stop taking that many threes if you're going to shoot below 30%. So Banchero shot below 34%. Anthony shot below 34%. They need to improve in that aspect, but when you're looking at Banchero and Wagner attempting a combined 9 threes per game, and they're averaging out to about 30%, that's not going to fly. You got to improve in that area. At least either improve or shoot less. It's one of the two.
Yeah, I know they had Ingles last year, but I mean, from a percentage perspective, he didn't see a lot of the floor with the injury that he came back with, and then again, just not being in the rotation. But it was Jalen Suggs at 39.7%, Anthony Black at 39.4%, and then Jonathan Isaac, who was at 37.5% for this team here as well. So again, like we mentioned, right, KCP should give them that boost that they really need. With some consistent 3-point shooting. I think from a game perspective, as far as player props goes, Scott, maybe look at KCP early in the season before the books do adjust to his number. Probably think it'll be at 1.5, and we'll see how many minutes he does be out or does play for this Orlando Magic team as far as being in the starting lineup. All right, before we do get over to the next team on in this division, not to say in the Southeast Division, let me tell you about our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Underdog Fantasy Pick'em is always adding to their awesome menu. They now have first touchdown projections, and there are a ton of ways to win with NFL, college football, MLB, MMA, and more. Their lobby is jam-packed with profit boosts and no-sweat entries, and you can now use specials and boosts on all flex entries. So sign up with promo code NBASGPN to claim your special pick and first-time deposit offer up to $1,000 in bonus cash. That's UnderdogFantasy.com. Make sure you use that promo code NBASGPN. All right, Scott, let's get over to the next team in this division. That is going to be the Miami Heat. As it stands for this upcoming season, their division odds are at plus 180. Win total is at 44.5. Miss playoffs minus 500 to make the playoffs, and they are plus 360 to miss the playoffs. And I will mention, I believe they are minus 120 to participate in that play-in tournament bracket. I'll confirm that here in a second here. But last season for this Miami Heat team, like we mentioned, finished up 46-36 on the season, just one game back of the Orlando Magic for the Southeast Division title. And this season, they come in with, again, not really many moves that they did make for bolstering the roster. And, there's always been rumors when big names do pop up, whether it's via free agency or trade, that Miami's Heat team's name is always there, but they just never seem to pull the trigger on it. I mean, we can talk about the Bradley Beals, the Kevin Durant, even when James Harden's name was popping up. Damian Lillard just last season there as well. They just haven't been able to land that next superstar next to Jimmy Butler. But Jimmy Butler did play in 60 games last season for this Miami Heat team. And you only had one player last season that played in 70 plus games for this Heat team, and that was, two players, I should say, Jaime Jaquez Jr. and Bam Adebayo. Bam played in 71 games, started all 71 for this team, but I feel like, the window for this Miami Heat team is closing or is already closed, just because, again, I don't feel like they're doing enough to upgrade the roster. Yeah, I know they acquired Terry Rozier last year to give him another scoring option, and he was pretty good for this Miami Heat team. But it seems like that health is always holding this team back here, Scott. But what are your thoughts on this Miami Heat team coming up for this upcoming year?
I found them to be the most difficult team to pick for a win total because, one, you don't know about the durability. Two, you don't know about the effort because they will sit a bunch of guys. We know Jimmy Butler last year was sitting out games. He didn't care about the player incentive, all NBA team game require. They didn't give a damn. Jimmy was the first guy to get eliminated from that. And we saw the Heat lose immediately in the playoffs to the Celtics, who won the title. Now, the question I have for you, do we think the Heat learned anything from last year? Because on one hand, they did end up losing the game to Philly in the game that you saw Butler get injured in. Then they ended up beating the Bulls, right? That's who they beat. They beat the Bulls.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then they ended up losing immediately to Boston, besides that one game where they got insanely hot from three.
Yeah.
But you can make the argument that the Heat might go into the season again saying, well, if we had Jimmy healthy and Rozier healthy, we could have beaten Boston. No, they wouldn't have. But they can talk themselves into it. Do I think they learned anything, or do I think they wrap Jimmy Butler in even more bubble wrap? I don't know. I feel like this team won 46 despite nobody playing last year, which is impressive.
Yeah.
That's why I'm on the fence. Because on paper, this team looks pretty good. The issue is there's a bunch of shenanigans that go around every year with the load management, with Butler, who misses at least 20 games every year. And we saw Hero was on the trading block. He missed a bunch of games last year too. Rozier missed the playoffs, and once again, they could have needed him. I just have too many questions with this team. I'm fed up with this team every year. I know last year was the easiest win total under that all of us had because that was a joke. That was like 50-something, and they weren't even close. 44.5 feels right. I think I am going to go under, though. To go through the Heat's actual seasons lately, they have gone under this number in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5-1, 6-1. In 6 of the last 8 seasons, they've gone under this number. It's going to be close. It's going to be very, very close. I'll go with the under. Give me the Heat to finish with around 43, and they're in the play-in.
I think for this Miami Heat team, I think it came to a point maybe the last couple of seasons where it didn't matter for them, where they did end up in the standings as far as the playoffs went. But I think now, with how much better teams above them have gotten on paper, obviously Boston winning the title last year, the depth that they have there is just insane, which really, I think, propelled them to win the title. You talk about Milwaukee. I know we'll talk about more about that team. I think it was just a very difficult transition year for Damian Lillard, right? Because he was with the Portland Trailblazers for 11, 12 years with, this obviously same organization, same city and things like that. But they definitely upgraded, obviously, with Dame. And I think they're going to have to figure out ways to, have him and Giannis coexist together and just, build that chemistry. I think that takes a little bit. And you talk about Philly, right? Obviously, with the health of Joel Embiid is always a question mark. And then the added Paul George, we'll see what they get out of him. Tyrese Maxey becoming an up and coming superstar. But you talk to the Miami Heat team, like it feels like it's a destination where players want to go play. But again, it just hasn't transpired where that big name, I think, since Dwayne Wade, LeBron, that era. And I know, look, they've been able to get to the NBA Finals, whether it was in the bubble or whether it was a couple seasons ago against the Denver Nuggets. But on paper, yeah, look, this team has a lot of great depth. They have one of the best coaches, if not the best coach. I think we would agree on that with Eric Spoelstra, and I think that's always to the advantage of this Miami Heat team. But I think this does get close. I agree with you that this could either fall where they get to 43 wins into that play-in tournament bracket, or they could end up winning 48, like 46, 47, 48 wins, something in that range, where they end up as a 5-6 seed and they avoid that play-in tournament bracket. But again, I think you're 100% correct, is that we've seen this over the last couple seasons where we just don't know what's going to, transpire or who's going to be playing out there on any given night for this Miami Heat team. So I'm slightly leaning towards the over, but I don't love it. I mean, if you had a gun to my head, I would go over, but this one is not something I would be putting money down on right now, just because everything we did talk about this Miami Heat team. But anything else for this Miami Heat team as far as the upcoming season goes?
Yeah, my favorite option for the sake of, I'd say, value involves the play-in. So I
Yeah.
don't mind them to make the play-in, but miss playoffs at plus 360. I mean, you mentioned how deep the actual Eastern Conference is, and I am aware that the Hawks made the play-in, which is a joke last year. The Bulls made the play-in, they suck too. So I understand the argument is that they should have an advantage in the play-in games, but 360? Could this implode? There's a chance this implodes, right?
Yeah, and again, you're one Jimmy Butler injury away from it imploding, or whether him or Tyler Hero, right? Um, I was pulling up that to participate. I think they were the second favorite in this division. We'll talk about the Hawks here in a minute, but minus 120 to participate in that Eastern Conference play-in tournament.
They're there every year at this point, right?
It is, right? Like, because again, like you mentioned, right, the regular season feels like it doesn't matter for this team.
No.
That they feel like that they can get into the playoffs as 6, 7, 8 seed, and they feel like they can just flip the switch because they've done it multiple times there. So, I mean, but again, I didn't even mention New York, the Knicks and the Indiana Pacers on the rise there as well. So, I mean, I think at some point the Miami Heat are going to have to make some type of move here. And again, Tyler Hero's name always is popping up in trade rumors there as well. But yeah, anything else?
Not really. I feel like just the Heat in general. Once again, the point is they made the play-in last year. Butler got hurt and Rozier didn't play.
Yeah.
So do I think they're going to learn anything from last year? Going, well, we got to make sure we're not in the play-in, or is the counterpoint we got to really make sure Rozier and everyone stay healthy? I think it's probably B. So they might even be coddling Jimmy more than we saw previously. So yeah, I think the Heat are wired the wrong way. I think the issue is they just surrounded the roster with a bunch of injury-prone players, and they're hoping that everyone can stay healthy.
Yeah.
Good luck with that, because I feel like Jimmy every year, I understand the upsides there. We saw it against the Bucks a couple of years ago in the playoffs. He can't be your number one. He doesn't play enough games.
Yeah.
It is what it is. I understand that he's a talented player, and I get that he has a certain mentality that a lot of people love, even though there are a lot of really bad playoff games that nobody wants to talk about, but I'm going to ignore that. The point is, when your best player takes a ton of games off and the organization gives them a lot of leeway to take games off, you basically have a Clipper situation where the players are never going to play, the chemistry is off, and you're going to lose in the first round all the time. Is that fair?
Yeah, and again, you'll see again. We haven't talked much about Terry Rozier because I feel like he's been a little bit hobbled, dealing with ankle injuries throughout the last couple seasons as well. But on paper, look, this team has. I mean, that starting five that looks like it's going to be Terry Rozier, Tyler Hero, Jimmy Butler, Nikola Jovic, and Bam Adebayo. I know we haven't even mentioned his name about Bam here, but I feel like the one area that they do lack here, Scott, is on the bench, guys coming off of the bench, because it's Josh Richardson, it's Duncan Robinson, it's Highsmith, and then it's Kevin Love. That doesn't, and sorry, obviously Jaime Hawk is there as well, but outside of Hawkins, nothing really else excites me, right? Because you're not going to get a whole heck of a lot out of Kevin Love, and then God forbid if one of those top players in between Rozier, Hero, or Butler do get injured, you really don't have that depth where they can really compensate if one of those guys goes down. I think that's really the downfall for this team. And I think, to your point, that Jimmy Butler can't be that number one guy anymore, that they need to maybe go out and find a 1A or 1B next to Jimmy Butler and maybe have to trade some of these pieces here. But it just doesn't excite me when they just haven't made a lot of upgrades to the roster and adding another star slash all-star slash superstar talent on this roster here. So I think that just could be their downfall as far as a roster perspective goes. And obviously we always talk about the health of this team as well. So yeah, we'll see what transpires with this Miami Heat team. But those are our thoughts for that Miami Heat team. All right, Scott, let's get over to the next team in this division. That's going to be the Atlanta Hawks. Last season, this team finished up 10 games under 500 in first year of a full season, I should say, of Quinn Snyder as the head coach of this Atlanta Hawks team. And another team that was, I guess, a little bit riddled by injuries, but I think that's always a theme, for any basketball team. They did get the number one overall pick this season, and they drafted Zachary Risashay, I think is the proper pronunciation.
Debatable first overall pick.
Yeah, I think in a lot of people's eyes for sure. Traded DeJounte Murray over to the Pelicans. In return, they got Dyson Daniels, Larry Nance Jr., some draft capital there as well for this team. And I think the big speculation was that maybe it was Trae Young that was going to get moved by this Atlanta Hawks team, but he again stays here on this roster. Or let me read off their odds here. So they are 11-1 to win this division with a win total of this season of 36.5. For them to make the playoffs is at plus 170. And for them to miss the playoffs is minus 210. And they are the odds-on favorite in the Eastern Conference, Scott, to make or participate, I should say, in the play-in tournament there at odds of minus 240. Look, this team has a lot of, I think, quality role players on this team, and their projected starting lineup for this upcoming season obviously will be there, led by Trae Young along with Bogdanovich. It will also be Jalen Johnson. We'll see if the number one overall pick, Zachary Risashay, I should say, gets the starting role there. And then I believe so that's their five. And then off the bench, be Dyson Daniels, DeAndre Hunter. Possibly he could be in the starting lineup for this team as well. And you also have Onyeka Okongwu and Larry Nance Jr. as well. So they do have some depth when it comes to that power forward / forward positions there. But outside of that, at the guard position, I think they're a little bit thin there. But last season, this was a team that, again, was riddled by injuries. Trae Young only played in 54 games last season. Bogdanovich, I know, got a late start to the year. Started 33 games. Jalen Johnson, another player that only played in 56 games, started 52 of them. DeAndre Hunter as well, only played in 57 games last year. So again, a team that was riddled by injuries. And when we talk about this Atlanta Hawks team, Scott, I think the conversation starts with Trae Young here. But what are your thoughts on the Atlanta Hawks for this upcoming year?
So I've roasted Trae Young for a while because I think he's the worst defensive player in the entire league. This team doesn't try to guard anybody. They lost DeJounte Murray over the offseason. The pairing didn't work with him and Trae. Yeah. They had to move somebody. I would have moved both, but the point is they kept Trae. They wanted somebody to sell tickets, I guess. Yeah. The question is, they won 36 games last year, and that many people missed games. Do I think they can go over in a pretty solid Eastern Conference? I feel like a lot of people are going to like the under because DeJounte ended up moving on and they still can't guard anybody. However, there's a lot of talent at the top of the Eastern Conference. There's a lot of really, really bad basketball at the bottom of the Eastern Conference, which is why the Hawks are the favorites to make the play-in. It's because they were 10 under last year and they still made the play-in. So the argument is, do I think they can potentially improve slightly? I'm going to lean over, actually. I don't think they're going to be good. Just to be clear, I'm not going to bet this. I think this team's not any good. However, do I think if Trae plays 65 games and you get like Bogdan and Jalen playing, let's just say 68 games apiece, can this team win 37? I think the answer is yes. I think this team will hover around 500. I'll put them under, and they'll be in the play-in. But 36.5, there are some really, really bad teams we're going to talk about, either in this episode or the next episode. In this division especially, spoiler, they're better than Charlotte and they're better than Washington. So I'm picking them to be a third-place team in this division. I think they find a way to 37. If you want an actual record prediction, I'll give them a solid 30. I'll give them 38 wins, and I'll give them about, I think they'll finish, once again, high 40s in losses, but they'll still go under. So give me 34 and 48. I mean, give me 38 and 44.
Yeah, I think the number that popped into my head was like 40 wins. I think that they could get there around 40 to 42. Again, a lot of the conversation we'll talk about these next two teams is how bad, especially the next two teams could be in this division, especially the bottom feeder in this division, Washington. But talk about some of the other teams, right? Detroit in this Eastern Conference, Washington. We'll talk about here in a minute. Chicago is going to be, I think, in that list there as well. I think with all the injuries and the guys just being in and out of the lineup and not just really having a flow, and Quinn Snyder implementing his, you know, offensive and defensive system. I think there's always that transition when you go from. I know prior to last season that he got in there for, I forgot what the exact number of games was when he did take over on the bench for the Atlanta Hawks team, but I still think there's that period where you kind of go through the offseason and coaches putting in their new systems, and it's difficult for coaches to figure out their rotations when half of the time, how guys are sitting on the bench there for this Atlanta Hawks team. And we mentioned it, right? There was only a handful of guys, just 3 guys last year who played 73 or more games, and one of them's not even on the roster anymore in DeJounte Murray. Clint Capella was the other guy, and his minutes last season really diminished because there was a lot of times prior to last season where we just were automatically on his double-doubles and his rebounds to go over. But then it was Garrison Matthews who played 66, Sadiq Bey at 63. We mentioned DeAndre Hunter, Jalen Johnson, 57 and 56. I think Jalen Johnson is going to be really, really good for this roster. The time that he was on the court prior to the injuries, he was absolutely fantastic for this team. So there's a lot of great depth, like I mentioned, at that forward and powered forward position and the center position there as well for this team. So my best bet last year was Atlanta Hawks to go over their number of 41.5. I mean, we saw how that one turned out. But I think I'm confident in this team that, again, with the way the rotations will fill out and the depth that they do have on this team, I think that this could be a team that could get into 40. I think the ceiling probably for this team is 40 wins. And again, I think we both expect this team to be in that play-in tournament bracket there for the upcoming season for their chance to make the playoffs there. What are your thoughts on Quinn Snyder? I don't think I've asked you that. I know he was good with the Utah Jazz, but he did have Donovan Mitchell, Bogdanovich, Rudy Gobert, and they found made a way to work. But what are your thoughts on Quinn Snyder?
I think stylistically, I think he's a modern-day D'Antoni. I just don't think that his team's actually playing defense. I can't tell if that's solely based on him or that's based on how little the star players on this team care about defense, because we know Trey hasn't tried to play defense his entire career. But even with Utah, I thought Gobert covered up a bunch of holes with his defensive scheme. And we saw that against the Mavericks in the playoffs, against the Clippers in the playoffs. They just kept getting burned on the perimeter all the time. I think he's an abysmal defensive head coach. Now, I think that offensively, I like Snyder a lot, and I like him for overs because a lot of their games end up landing in the 260s. But as a coach, I think he's fine. Is that a fair comparison? I know D'Antoni was more successful with Phoenix, but the argument is, if you want to talk about who kind of resembles the play style and maybe I'd say, same flaws that D'Antoni dealt with, I think Quinn Snyder checks a lot of those boxes, and I don't mean that in a good way.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I think that when he was with Utah, I should say that when they had Rudy Gobert anchoring this the center position and the
rotations
painter,
were a mess with that team, by the way.
It was. And so I keep on going back to the depth. They have guys that can guard, especially on the perimeter with DeAndre Hunter, Jalen Johnson. I think those guys can match up on the best offensive player of the opposing team. It's just what you're going to get out of Trae Young, because he's pretty much a parking cone out there when it comes to the defensive side of the basketball. But that's pretty much all I had for this team. You have anything else for this Atlanta Hawks team?
Not really. Once again, they're a team that should be a lot of fun for overs, but do I really like in general? No. I think they're going to finish below 500. Do want to point out, though, that even though he barely played last year, AJ Griffin was on the roster. He retired. So that was another young wing, I guess if you want to call him that they could have used potentially. He retired. Not that he was going to play much anyway. But DeJounte leaving, they had to break it up. I still would have nuked the entire team. And I'm not sure if their first-round pick's going to contribute anything. Seems like a decent three-point shooter. But they had a lot of guys missing a lot of games last year. 36.5. I think if Trey plays like 70 games, they'll just find a way offensively to get to 38. That's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, and again, we didn't talk a lot about their first overall pick there. I think he's obviously going to be the X
much
factor.
About him.
Yeah, we don't, and I think that's going to be the wild card for this Atlanta Hawks team and what you get out of him. Next to Bogdanovich and obviously Trae Young. to lead this team to wins in there. So that will be definitely something we'll keep an eye on when the season does start for the Atlanta Hawks. All right, before we do get over to the next team in this division, let me tell everyone about the newest sponsor on the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. That's going to be BetUS. We're brought to you by BetUS. Bet what the best in the business. BetUS. BetUS has been around for more than 30 years. Easily deposit using cryptocurrency and get lightning fast payouts. Support SGPN and get yourselves access to another great book by signing up at BetUS. And use our link to sign up and get a 125% bonus on your first 3 deposits. Just go to sportsgamblingpodcast.com/BetUS. That's sportsgamblingpodcast.com/BetUS, promo code SGPN, so they know that we sent you. And we're also brought to you by Rhythm. SGPN's proud partner Rhythm is a #1 AI-powered back sports betting platform that helps provide bettors of all levels the ability to build custom predictive betting models in seconds. Get predictions for betting on money lines, spreads, totals, and props. Build your own model, copy one of the top performing models from the leaderboard, or press build a model for me, and Rhythm gives you predictions for every game and player props, and also has a myriad of stats, research, and trend analysis to give you even more betting insights. Claim your 7-day free trial today by going to sportsgamblingpodcast.com/rhythm. That's sportsgamblingpodcast.com/RITHMM. All right, Scott, let's get over to the next game, or next team in this division, I should say. That's going to be the Charlotte Hornets. They come into the season with a win total of 30.5. Division odds currently sitting at 55-1. For them to make the playoffs is at 5-1, and for them to miss the playoffs is at let's see here, -750. And this was another team last season. I think that injuries are just a part of this division, and we saw LaMelo Ball, who last season didn't play a whole heck of a lot of games. I'm just pulling up the exact numbers here. 22 games that he played last year for this Charlotte Hornet team. And again, a guy that's supposed to be the future of this franchise. He's always just dealing with ankle injuries. But outside of that, Miles Bridges had a pretty good year last year for this Charlotte Hornets team. Brandon Miller, in his rookie season, played in 74 of the 82 games, started 68 of them, averaged 17.3 points. But then outside of that, it was really not much after the trade that transpired for Terry Rozier. And on another team that just struggled on the defensive side of the basketball, and that's really been the theme of this team for several seasons now. And I know their head coach, there was multiple times last season that called them out for their defensive performance, and just the following night they would come out and give up another 120, 125 plus points. I feel like this roster is lacking a little bit here, Scott, but we can talk about the Charlotte Hornets here for this upcoming season with a win total of 30.5.
Yeah, so they have a brand new coach. They told Clifford to take a hike, and they ended up hiring Charles Lee, again, true. He was the top assistant for the Celtics last year, so he won a title and decided, you know what, I want to go to Charlotte. So we'll see what happens here. I feel like I'm going to have to go under. A part of me thought about the over because, once again, you saw how many guys miss games, especially LaMelo, who barely played last year.
Yeah.
I just think this team is full of losers. I just think this team doesn't actually try to play winning basketball. I feel like there's a lot of me guys on there. Don't want to compare it to like a football quote, but Josh Allen the other day said it's nice to have guys on the team that don't care about stats. Now, people interpreted that as a roast of Stephon Diggs, but I feel that way about this Hornets team. LaMelo, I feel like, cares about a bunch of his stats. He doesn't try to play any defense. And I feel like Miles Bridges is another kind of guy who can put up good numbers. Do I think that he is a guy that I trust to be fully engaged defensively for a season? No. Mark Williams didn't play much last season. He played a little bit. They kind of had a weird rotation going with him and Richards at the center spot.
Yeah.
They have Grant Williams, who I think most coaching staffs hate, and that's why he got thrown out of Dallas in about half a season. But I like Josh Green. I think he'll be a solid piece there. The issue I also have with Lee, it helps when you're an assistant coach on a team that's probably the deepest roster in the entire league, and you can go 10 deep, and you could survive by having a lot of depth. What depth does this team have? They don't have anybody. Like, you're looking at the actual, I'd say, bench for this team. You have Micic, who we saw briefly last year. He looked fine. Trey Man, I don't mind. I think he's a good three-point shooter. Cody Martin, who is okay, I guess. Grant Williams and Nick Richards. And you got Taj Gibson somewhere in there. You get my point. I feel like it's a lot easier to be an assistant coach when your roster is absolutely stacked.
Yeah.
And now you got to reinvent everything with a team that's not very good to begin with. I like the under. LaMelo gets hurt every year. He'll play more games than last year. But I still don't like the way this team's wired. I think LaMelo is a losing basketball player. I've said it before. I don't think Trae Young's the most winning basketball player either, but LaMelo never tries to guard anybody, and I feel like a lot of the offense is built on give me the ball, get out of the way, we're going to lose, but I'm going to get mine, and I'm going to leave with 25, 10, and 6. That feels like what LaMelo tries to do. I think he cares a lot about his stats. I think he doesn't care that much about winning, and I think the team's going to struggle because of it. I think this team wins 26 games. I think this team is a classic case, especially in the flag sweepstakes for the upcoming season, where they are out of the playoff picture with a month or two to go, and suddenly there's a lot of questionable tags around LaMelo and around Miles Bridges. I see them sitting a bunch of guys at the end of the year. I see them trying to maximize the ping pong ball chances, and I think this team tanks hard at the end of the year. I'm going under. I think they win 26 games.
Is this not a lot of talent that excites me on this roster, especially when I'm looking at teams that go with the over with? I'm always looking at the depth, and this team doesn't have a whole heck of a lot of depth or anything at all. I mean, it's Nick Smith Jr., Seth Curry, Trey Mann, Josh Green. Yeah, those guys, as far as between Josh Green and Brandon Miller's, give them some type of defensive ability, but it takes 4 guys, 3-4 guys to play defense. And we know, number one, what can cross off the list, what you mentioned, that LaMelo Ball is not going to play any type of defense. If you're playing fantasy basketball this year, yeah, he's probably a great guy to have on your roster because, like Scott mentioned, I wholeheartedly agree that he wants to fill up the stat sheet and, get as many triple doubles as he can. Cody Martin is not, he doesn't really excite you. A great piece to have, whether it's in your starting lineup or coming off the bench. Right now, I'm seeing they're going to start Grant Williams. I think that's a huge mistake. I think Mark Williams should be that guy in there for them at the starting center position. But again, it's just that there's not a lot
Grant Williams or Mark Williams?
Mark Williams, I'm sorry.
Okay,
to start. Yeah. But right now they have Grant Williams slated on the depth chart to start, but I think that's a mistake. It should be Mark Williams because he did average 13 points and 10 rebounds last year, along with I want to say he was pretty good as far as blocked shots went last year as well.
Foul trouble was an issue, but he was still solid in general.
Yeah. 12 points, 7 points per game, 9.7 rebounds, and he was around, only 1.1 blocks per game. But so again, is what you mentioned, that if we don't really trust LaMelo Ball to stay healthy, and that I think there's just a significant fall off after that. I know Miles Bridges can step up in those spots, but it's the fact about can he lead it to wins, and I don't think they have those type of players on this roster. I think they're kind of in that path where the Detroit Pistons had been over the past several seasons, just trying to acquire
before they totally bottomed out.
Yeah. Just trying to get as many draft picks and trying to figure it out and throw it together and hopefully sticks to the wall. Because Pistons have not been very good in that over the past several seasons there as well. Maybe they do turn around now. But I just feel like that Charlotte Hornets are kind of headed down that path of the Detroit Pistons here. So I wouldn't be surprised if this team is as low as, like what you mentioned, 26, 25 wins, just competing for ping pong balls at the end of the season there. So I really didn't have much for this team. Under would be the look here for me. Another team we probably want to look at, again, taking their full games to go over until we see any type of defense being played. And then on it from a player prop perspective, from game to game basis, you obviously will look at LaMelo Ball, and if Mark Williams rebounds are there for sure. Those are the 2 ones that I have circled as far as when it comes to game by game player props. But we'll talk about that when we get to the season. Anything else for this Hornets team?
Yeah, I do want to point out that I didn't really mention Brandon Miller much in my breakdown. I do like Brandon Miller.
Yeah.
I feel like I was wrong when I went through his overall draft process, not even because of his overall skill, but because he was linked to a murder trial, which wasn't exactly, the greatest way to start your NBA career, but he was great. I thought he was probably, the second best rookie last year?
Yeah, 100%. I can agree with that. Yeah.
So I think he's definitely solid. That's why I feel like LaMelo, you could argue, might be good for Miller because he'll get him the ball. but I kind of want to see Miller operate more with the ball in his hands.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure that LaMelo is going to let him do that. I don't think Miller and Bridges' games are that great off ball. I feel like they kind of need the ball in their hands, and I'm not sure LaMelo is going to be the guy to forfeit possession of the ball. So it's kind of an issue that I think can grow over the course of this season. But the fact is, you have a first-time head coach who has been he's been on a member of a couple successful, I'd say, coaching staffs with the Bucks when they won the title with Budenholzer. He was the coach for the Celtics last year as an assistant, but now you're in charge of a really dysfunctional roster. That's going to take some growing pains as well, not just from the players, from the coaching staff in general. So with that combo and potential tanking, Cooper flag is really, really good. You might get a lot of tanking teams at the end of the year. So I'm going under. I think they finish in the 20s.
Yeah, Brandon Miller last year in his rookie season, 17.3 points per game, 4.3 rebounds, and shot 37.3% from beyond the arc and 82.7% from the free throw line for Brandon Miller, which I did. I think that's a very successful rookie campaign for Brandon Miller. All right, let's get over to the last team in this division, the dumps of the Southeast Division, which is going to be the Washington Wizards for this upcoming season. They have a win total of 20.5. I don't remember the last time I saw a 20.5, honestly. 400-1 to win this division. They're 22-1 to make the playoffs and minus 800 to miss the playoffs here. And last season for this Wizards team, they finished up 15-67. Not very pretty last season, to say the least, for this team. And you take a look at their roster this upcoming season. They did sign Jonas Valanciunas, where I don't know why that even happened for this team. But when I look at this team here, Scott, I just don't know what the direction is. Like, what's the end game for this team? Because there's not a lot of talent on this team. Obviously, that's reflected here in the win total for this team for this upcoming season. But you take a look at what their starting rotation is supposed to be for this upcoming season. It is going to be Jordan Poole, Johnny Davis, Saddiq Bey, Kyle Kuzma, and Jonas Valanciunas. Malcolm Brogdon coming off of the bench. You have Bilal Coulibaly coming off of the bench for them as well. They also have Marvin Bagley III on this bench, Corey Kispert. So it's just a bunch of role players trying to play some basketball and win some games. 20.5 is low, but I think this team is probably going to be in that range of 10 to 15, or not 10 wins, but like 15 wins, 16 wins, something similar to what we all saw last year. When you have Jordan Poole, that's supposed to be your number one guy in the season that he did have last year, I think he's going to be another guy that's going to just go out there chunking up the basketball. And last season, a lot of us expected him to go out there and put up 20 to 25 points per game. But I don't know if it was just him, leaving the Golden State Warriors and maybe, I don't want to say being exposed, but he was just atrocious last year. We'll get into the numbers here in a second, but let's start with the win total here, 20.5 here, Scott.
Under. I think they might be the worst team in the league.
No.
You could argue the Nets are going to be there too, but the Wizards are everything that I hate about the Hawks and Hornets defensively, and they have no offense. So there's nothing to like about this team. Yeah, when you're going through the roster, you lost me at Johnny Davis, who I feel like most people think shouldn't be in the league at this point. But you're looking at what they did during the offseason. They lost Tyus Jones. They got Brogdon, who, if he plays more than 30 games in the season, they have a parade. I like Brogdon as a player. He's never healthy. I don't really know what he's supposed to do with this team. You're looking at Poole, who is a mess. Kuzma, I think, is fine, but he usually gets hurt, so I think he might miss a couple games here or there. They re-sign Avdia, who I think is one of their better players on the roster, but I just don't know what there is to like about this team. And even the pick that they made in Sarr, he was awful in preseason in Summer League. Now, or I should say Summer League. Now, I'm not saying that's going to mean he's a bust, but I think we'd all agree he is a project.
Yeah.
It's probably going to struggle in his rookie season. So I think they're just tanking.
Yeah.
You're looking at this roster and you're going, what's the direction? You pray for some ping pong balls? I don't know what the overall upside is for this team. They have a very dysfunctional core. I think that you're looking at Kuzma, who chose to stay in Washington, realistically for the money and for the lack of pressure. I think that's why he stayed there. Yeah. Not for the culture, I'll tell you that much. But there's not much to like about this roster. I don't know what you're looking at as a bright spot besides Avdia, who I think is a pretty solid, I'd say, potential third or fourth option. That's basically it. Like, I don't think Poole's that good. They ended up getting, the head coach is Brian Keefe, who I got to look up his overall numbers. He's never been a head coach before, which is not a good sign. The Unseld experiment was atrocious, but he was an assistant last year, so they promoted internally, which is probably not a great sign. I believe was he the interim from last year?
I believe so.
They went 8-30. They went 8-31. So clearly his message wasn't going too well. I'm on the under. I think this team wins 15 games. And we're talking about the bottom feeders. The team that has the best chance, or at least I think the bottom three records have the same percentage. A team that will have the tied for the highest percentage to get the number one pick. The Wizards will be in there, and I would be shocked if they weren't in there. So they're probably winning somewhere between 14 and 17 games. Give me the under. This team's going to suck.
I'll be curious to see what like the combined average of wins has been for the bottom three teams over the past several seasons.
It's definitely below 21.
Yeah, 100%. And again, pretty much everything that you mentioned, right? This roster is not very good. You have a bunch of guys that, yes, have the potential. But I think that if they do end up with the number one pick and they get Cooper Flag, that you have guys that, you can play next to him. And you mentioned, we'll see what we get out of Alex Sarr this upcoming season. Denny Avdia, I do like as well. He's not on this roster anymore. He got traded, didn't he? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he ended up getting traded. But I was saying, sorry, yeah. I forgot to mention that. So they gave Avdia a contract, then he's not on the roster anymore. So it's the only thing I actually liked about this team, and he's not on the team anymore. Thank you for correcting me on that. I forgot he got traded.
Yeah.
So they don't have anybody that I like. Avdia was the only guy I thought that actually looked like a winning basketball player, and now he's on Portland. So yeah, they don't have anybody. I mean, I'm reading off the rotation right now. You have Brogdon, Poole,
which will get traded.
Yeah, Brogdon's probably getting flipped. Poole, Kuzma, Sarr, and Valanciunas. Your bench is potentially Carrington, Kispert, Koulibaly, who might be decent. We haven't exactly seen much of him. Baldwin Jr., you have Rashawn Holmes on there, or Bagley. This roster, I mean, I'm reading off the starting lineup. That's a team that wins like 15 games.
Yeah, I agree.
Avdia, thank you. I forgot that he got traded right before the draft. That is an awful roster. This should be the worst team in the league. I'd be shocked if they won 18 games. I'll go with the under.
I'm kind of looking at like other bottom feeding teams in the Eastern Conference. I think
the Nets are the wild card because we really don't know how bad they're going to be. They're going to be bad.
Yeah,
but I don't know if they're going to be Wizards bad.
Yeah, so I think 2 out of the 3 teams in this division are going to be those bottom feeders in the Wizards and in the Hornets. I think we both have more confidence in the Hornets being that team just because
they're more talented.
Right, yeah. But this Wizards team is, I mean, it's just going to be a very, very long season if you are a Wizards fan, which I don't know very many that are out there. But yeah, I mean, I really don't have much in it. You have anything else for this Wizards team?
Not really. I think the team's going to be bad. Apologies, I forgot that Avdia got traded.
No, you're good. Yeah,
the trade
that's why we do these
sense.
previews.
The trade made no sense in the first place because they just paid him a bunch of money and he was actually good for them. And they decided, you know what? We're going to flip him for some picks. And it's like, for what? What are you trying? I forgot that's how they got Brogdon in the end. But yeah. I don't understand anything they're doing. They're a completely dysfunctional organization. You said, what's the direction? The direction's incompetence. Nobody actually trusts anything that they do. The fan base hates them. The front office doesn't know what they're doing. This is a full-on bottom feeder team. It might be a tank-off between them and the Nets, but I think the Nets have more talent than the Wizards if I had to break it down, at least conceptually.
Yeah.
So I'll go with the Wizards to have the worst record in the league if you can find odds on that. I think they win around 15 games.
Let me see if we can find that here before.
I didn't see it on DraftKings, but I was looking for it.
Yeah, they usually have. And DraftKings does a pretty good job of putting out those markets, but I just don't see it. I see most regular season wins.
They didn't have least,
best record.
Which bothered me. But
yeah. All right. Yeah, so that is the last team in this division for this upcoming 2024-2025 season, the Southeast division. Scott, let's wrap it up with a best bet Whether it's a win total, miss playoffs, participate in the play-in tournament, and then also who do we think wins this division here? You want to lead us off?
Sure. So for my best bet, if odds were not a factor, Wizards to miss the playoffs at -800. But since we're doing odds here, give me the Wizards win total under 20.5. Thought about Orlando. Some injuries could go wrong, though. They were pretty healthy last year. This Wizards team has no incentive to even be decent. They built this roster with the hope, and they traded away Avdia, knowing that it's a bad draft, and they were going to get a potential chance at Cooper Flag next year. They don't give a damn. This team is awful. Brogdon's probably getting flipped. We know Poole's been a net negative with the contract, especially. Kuzma's fine. Is that it?
We didn't mention the Valanciunas contract. They gave him 20 and a, or close to $21 million guaranteed.
Yeah, he's good for double betting. I'm sure the front office is going to bet double props to try to pay for some free agents, but they are nothing. Like Valanciunas, even in today's NBA, was kind of a starter with quotes around it, but he played like 20 minutes because they know he can't guard the 3-point line. So defensively, he's not going to help, but offensively, he'll help him with rebounding. But this team sucks. I think they might be the worst team in the entire league. 20.5 is too high. Give me the under.
All right, yeah, I couldn't talk you off of that. 100% agree with that for sure. So I'll co-sign that with you. I think for my best bet, since we mentioned a lot of negativity here.
Just ask though, was that going to be your best bet, the Wizards under, or no?
It was either going to be that or the over in the Orlando Magic win total. Okay. I just really like what I saw from this Orlando Magic team last year. They're very well coached. I think adding KCP as a veteran and giving them some 3-point shooting there as well. Definitely, so obviously only going to help them. And I think, again, I this has kind of been a theme for me when I'm looking at some of these teams, is that those teams that got a taste of the playoffs that first year with a young group of guys, I feel like they still have that hunger of wanting to get back there. And with the talent that they do have on this roster, I do think that they can get into getting over this win total, number one, and I think they can get to 49, 50 wins. I think someone in our Discord there had put together a wins parlay, and they had the Magic at 50 plus wins. And I mentioned that was a bold take, but I think now when I went back and kind of looked at it, I think it's definitely a possibility that they can get to 50 plus wins here. So I'll give you the Orlando Magic over 47.5 wins as my best bet. The division winner, obviously, I think is between the top two teams, and I don't like laying a -1, like a minus price when it comes to division odds for a season long. It's just I don't know like what Miami Heat's health situation is going to look like and what their motivation is when we talked about that team. So I guess by default, I do like the Magic to win this division again. But would I be surprised if the Miami Heat come out and play well to start the season? No, I wouldn't be shocked. But again, it's just over 82 game span. Does this team stay healthy enough to win this division? And that's the hesitation I do have. So I think just by default, I think that Orlando Magic do win this division here. Scott, any different thoughts on the division winner, or do you like Orlando as well?
Yes. Warning, some positive news for the listeners. We will talk about better divisions in future episodes.
Yeah, we maybe wanted to start with the bottom of the bottom here on the first episode before we get to the other 5 divisions there as well. So again, a great time if you already subscribed to the NBA Gambling Podcast, of course, with the WNBA playoffs. Semifinals start on over the weekend. And then, of course, us ramping up for the NBA season. So at least this channel is pretty much 365 days a year. So yeah, tap in with us if you haven't already. The first of the divisions. Not sure what we'll do the next one. So again, like I mentioned, good time to be subscribed. We'll get that notification when we do go live here for the division previews. And of course, you can also follow us on Twitter. That's at NBA SGPN for the podcast. Scott, anything else you want to mention before we get out of here?
No. Once again, not exactly sure what the schedule is going to be for the next division preview episode. We're going to have a bunch of episodes coming up.
Yeah.
Point is, I know Terrell and I are going to be doing a WNBA episode for the Sunday game ones of the conference finals, but we're going to do that on Friday. So keep that in mind. The game starts Sunday. We're going to do it a day early. We're going to do it on Friday.
All right. Yeah. Again, like a reminder, make sure you guys are subscribed here to the NBA Gambling Podcast YouTube channel for all the content coming up for WNBA and NBA. Make sure you guys follow Scott on Twitter, you can follow him there at Reichel Radio. You can follow me there as well at SportsNerd824. And of course, like I mentioned, you can follow the NBA Gambling Podcast Twitter account at NBA SGPN. All right, we will talk to you guys in the next episode. Again, like Scott mentioned, look out for them for the WNBA Gambling Podcast for the semifinal games on Sunday. Till then, good luck with your bets. Let's break these books off, and always remember to let it ride.